the rust-like smell of blood and the cold sweat of fear. Those are the two things that never wash away from the memory of a Roman soldier. They say we built the empire with sword and stone, but I know the truth. Its foundations are mixed with agony. Sometimes the agony of our enemies, but more often, our own. My name is Lucius. Now, I am just an old man whose joints ache when the wind turns, sitting in a quiet villa far from the din of Rome. The wine in my cup is the color of dried blood, and the silence in this room is sometimes louder than the roar of the Colosseum. Last night, a burnt log shifted in the hearth, falling with a dull, heavy thud. That single sound was enough to pull me back 20 years to the cold forests of Germanicus, where I first learned the true price of Roman discipline. I was barely 20 then, still green enough to believe in the legion's honor and the bonds of brotherhood.
I remember the cold.
So did Cassius.
The kind of cold
He was my
that settles
age,
deep in your bones.
a boy from
never
Gaul
leaves.
with a wide grin and sturdy shoulders.
supplies
We had
moving.
shared the last
We
drops
march
from a
at
water
dawn.
skin,
Keep
had
your
stood
eyes on
back
the
to back
woods.
against barbarian hordes. He was my brother. But during one skirmish, under the crushing charge of enemy cavalry, our shield wall faltered. Cassius, 2 men down from me, hesitated. It was just for a moment, a pause that lasted a single heartbeat, but it was long enough for the centurion to see. We won the battle, but Cassius had lost his war. The next afternoon, our entire century was ordered to assemble. No swords, no shields, only the heavy oak rods we used for building ramparts. They were called the Fustus. That day, they were instruments of justice. The centurion, a hardened man with a scar that split his eyebrow, announced the sentence in a flat, emotionless voice. For displaying cowardice before the enemy, for endangering his brothers, Cassius has broken his oath.
Law is
The
absolute.
punishment is
For your
Fustuarium.
crimes against
They
the
stripped
Legion, there is
Cassius
no
of his armor and
clemency.
tunic,
You will
leaving
be
him in a thin
executed at
loincloth.
sunset.
He stood, shivering between 2 lines, formed by us, his comrades. I was in the left line, my hand gripping the rod. The rough grain of the wood bit into my palm, cold and heavy. I looked at Cassius. He wasn't crying. His eyes scanned the familiar faces, the men he had eaten with, slept beside, fought alongside. When his gaze fell on me, I looked away. I could not bear it. Let this be a lesson, the centurion bellowed. Discipline is the lifeblood of the legion. Without it, we are a mob. Without it, Rome falls. Carry out the sentence. The first soldier struck. A sickening crack echoed, followed by a choked groan. Then the second. Their rods fell on Cassius's back, his shoulders, his legs. I heard the snap of bone, a dry sound that made my stomach churn. Dust kicked up from the ground, mingling with the smell of sweat and terror. Cassius fell, but the blows did not stop. He curled into a ball, a futile attempt to shield his head. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward, the rod feeling impossibly heavy. Cassius was no longer groaning, only making small, gasping sounds. Blood seeped from a dozen wounds, staining the earth dark red. I closed my eyes and swung. I didn't aim. I just wanted it to be over. The wet thud of my rod hitting his body was the worst sound I have ever heard. When I stepped back, my hands were trembling. I no longer recognized the man crumpled on the ground. It was not Cassius. It was an example, a lesson written in blood and bone. But the cruelty of Rome was not reserved for the battlefield. It seeped into the very fabric of society, a tool for maintaining order among the classes. A few years later, transferred back to Rome, I witnessed another form of punishment, one that did not kill the body but was perhaps more horrifying. It was not meant to end a life, but to crush a soul. They called it the Radish Humiliation. I was on guard duty at the villa of a tax collector, a fat and wealthy man. One of his slaves, a Nubian girl with proud eyes, was accused of insolence. Her punishment was not the whip. Instead, they dragged her into a damp cellar, lit by the flickering light of a few torches. The overseer, a scarred man who looked even crueler than my old centurion, held a large radish, carved to a sharp point. There was no screaming. There was a horrifying silence. The other slaves were forced to watch, their eyes fixed on the floor, their shoulders trembling. That silence, that collective humiliation, was the real torture. The girl did not cry, but I saw something in her eyes break. Her pride was extinguished, replaced by a hollow, soulless void. I stood there, a guard of Roman law, and felt sick. We ruled not just by fear of death, but by the fear of being stripped of one's very humanity. The lesson of humiliation in that cellar was more haunting than anything I had witnessed on the battlefield. A clean death by the sword, be it of a foe or a comrade, had something pure about it. But the systematic destruction of dignity, the turning of a person into an object of contempt, that was the true power of Rome. That power was not only displayed in darkness, it was celebrated under the brilliant sun, before tens of thousands of roaring eyes. It was turned into entertainment. I once stood guard on the highest tiers of the Colosseum, looking down at the blood-stained sand. From up there, men looked like ants. The roar of the crowd was a physical beast. It slammed into your chest, intoxicating you with collective madness. They didn't come to see a fight. They came to see an elaborate, staged execution. They called it Damnatio ad Bestias, condemnation to the beasts. To understand it, do not see it from my post. Instead, walk with a German prisoner, a man we captured after a northern rebellion. He didn't know how long he had been in the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, urine, and the fear of those who had come before. The muffled roar of the crowd above was like distant thunder. Occasionally, a savage growl would echo closer, making the stone floor vibrate. They shoved him from his cell, the chains on his wrists and ankles clanking. Torchlights slid across the guards' emotionless faces. He was forced down a narrow corridor, and at the end of the tunnel, a rectangle of brilliant light glowed like the gate of hell. The heavy iron gate was raised with a deafening screech. Sunlight flooded in, blinding him. And then, the wall of sound hit. The screams, cheers, and curses of 50,000 Romans. It struck him like a physical wave. He stumbled out onto the hot sand, and the world expanded into an immensity. He looked up at the endless tiers of packed humanity, alien faces distorted with excitement. In his hand was only a short, splintered spear, a joke. From another gate on the opposite side, the beast was released, a lion. Its mane was a matted tangle, its flanks gaunt with starvation. It blinked for a moment, confused by the light and noise. Then it saw him, its amber eyes locked on. It roared, a sound that came from the depths of its chest, full of power and primal hunger. The crowd roared back in answer. From my high vantage point, I saw it all. The prisoner stood tall, a final act of defiance. The lion charged, a blur of tawny fur against the sand. The encounter was over almost as soon as it began. I heard a scream cut brutally short. The crowd erupted. They leaped to their feet, waving their arms, celebrating the death of a man they did not know. I saw only a red stain spreading on the sand. A successful performance. But even the public brutality of the arena was not the most terrifying form of Roman justice. The most refined cruelty, the kind reserved for those at the apex of power, happened in silence. It came in a cup of wine. One night, I was assigned to guard a banquet at the villa of Senator Valerius. The air was heavy with expensive incense and roasted meat. The most powerful men in Rome reclined on couches, draped in silk, discussing politics and wars in faraway lands they would never visit. I stood in the corner, motionless as a statue. My gladius a cold reminder of order. Valerius, the host, was in the middle of a joke. He threw his head back, his hearty laugh echoing through the hall. A slave refilled his goblet. Valerius raised it high. To Rome, he bellowed. The others echoed the toast. He took a long drink, and then the laughter choked in his throat. Valerius froze, his eyes wide, his expression shifting from mirth to surprise, then to terror. He convulsed, his hands clawing at his own throat as if trying to rip something out. The silver goblet fell, its clatter on the marble floor shockingly loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room. Red wine spilled out, looking like a pool of blood. Valerius collapsed, twitched a few times, and then lay still. No one moved, no one screamed. The powerful guests just stared at the body, and then at each other, their eyes filled with calculation and fear. The killer was in that room. He might be sitting right next to them, his face a mask of calm. Here, the weapon was not a sword or a beast. It was a colorless, odorless drop of poison, delivered with a smile. Now, as I sit alone in this villa, I often find myself staring into my own cup of wine. The club, the radish, the lion, and the poisoned goblet. They are all tools of the same empire, one built on discipline, maintained by humiliation, entertained by death, and ruled by betrayal. People praise the order and the law that Rome brought to the world, but I have stood behind the curtain. I have seen the price of that order. And sometimes, in the quiet, I wonder if we brought civilization at all, or if we just perfected the art of cruelty.